Hi, my name is Avery Collins. I'm 42 years old, and I serve as a colonel in the United States Army, currently stationed in Washington, D.C. But this story isn't about the medals I've earned, the missions I've led, or the countless nights I've spent in foreign lands protecting the country I love. This story is about something far more personal, about a family that once cast me out, a sister's wedding that unearthed a decade of silence, and a truth that refused to stay buried. 10 years ago, I was known as the ugly high school graduate in my own family. The girl with braces, thick glasses, unruly brown hair, and a face constantly battling acne. In contrast, my younger sister, Samantha Collins, was the golden child. Blonde, graceful, always smiling, the image of perfection. While she was celebrated at every turn, I was constantly reminded, especially by my mother, to try harder with my appearance, as if acne and bad eyesight were character flaws instead of biological realities. My father, Edward Collins, a powerful man who ran a high-profile investment firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, barely acknowledged me during dinner. He was obsessed with public image and how the world perceived his flawless family. I never fit into that vision. Everything changed the night of my high school graduation. I still remember walking past his study, accidentally overhearing his phone conversation with a business partner. His voice was clear and confident, the same tone he used when sealing major deals. "Yes, my daughter Samantha is the family jewel," he said, followed by a short laugh. Unfortunately, the older one, well, let's just say she didn't inherit the good genes. An ugly graduate doesn't exactly reflect well on the family brand. Those words weren't just a dagger, they were poison, seeping deep into the core of my identity. That night, I cried in silence, the kind of sobs that leave you breathless and empty. But the worst wasn't what he said, it was what came after. I confronted them the next morning, voice trembling but determined. I told them I had heard everything. I told them I knew exactly how they saw me. My father's reaction? Rage. "So now you're eavesdropping? What did you expect to hear? Lies?" "It's the truth, Avery. Samantha has always been the face of this family. You simply don't fit into our image." My mother, Carolyn Collins, stood quietly behind him, eyes lowered, nodding like she always did when he spoke. Not a single word of defense. Not a single gesture of maternal care. That same evening, I packed my bags and walked out of the only home I had ever known. No one called. No one came looking for me. A few weeks later, a distant cousin whispered to me that they had changed the family will, removing me entirely. It wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. For the next 10 years, I lived like a ghost to them. But I wasn't broken. I had one thing they didn't expect. Resilience. I joined the Army. At first, it was about escape, finding a place where I could prove myself without needing to be pretty. But it became so much more. I found purpose. I discovered discipline. The acne faded, the braces came off, my body grew strong, and my confidence became unshakable. But most importantly, I found a family in my comrades. A real one. I rose through the ranks, mission after mission, promotion after promotion. Now, as a colonel, I carry my achievements on my shoulders, quite literally, with every star, badge, and stripe earned through sweat and sacrifice. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was commanding. I was leading. I had become someone they could no longer ignore. And then, out of nowhere, it arrived. A white envelope with golden script. "The Collins family joyfully invites you to the union of Samantha Collins and Captain Michael Thompson, son of General Richard Thompson, Ret., United States Army." I stared at the invitation in disbelief. After a decade of silence, they dared to invite me? Samantha, marrying into a prominent military family, didn't even consider the irony. I held that card in my hand for a long time. My hands didn't shake, but my heart raced. Was this a trap? A ploy to appear like a complete family in front of Michael's elite circle? After all, General Thompson was one of the most respected retired officers in the country. His son, Michael, was a rising star in the Army himself. Their wedding was sure to be filled with top-ranking officials, military families, and political connections. But I wasn't going for them. I wasn't going for apologies or reconciliation. I was going for something far greater. Justice. Not the kind that punishes, but the kind that proves them wrong without saying a single word. And this time, I wouldn't arrive in shame. I would arrive in full army dress uniform, adorned with my insignias, my ribbons, and my stars, each one a silent testament to my journey. I would enter not as the girl they cast out, but as Colonel Avery Collins, United States Army. And I knew exactly when I'd make my entrance. Right in the middle of the reception. Right when they least expected it. Because revenge is best served in silence, and in uniform. The day of the wedding arrived with a sharpness in the air, like the calm before a storm. The ceremony was being held at the Grand Oak Ballroom in Austin, Texas, a prestigious venue often reserved for political galas and military award banquets. It was no surprise, given that the groom, Captain Michael Thompson, was a respected officer in the U.S. Army, and his father, General Richard Thompson, retired, was practically military royalty. The entire event was set to be a showcase of legacy, elegance, and tradition. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my hotel room, adjusting the brass on my Army service uniform. The deep green jacket hugged my frame perfectly, every button polished to a mirror shine. My shoulder bore the rank insignia of a colonel, the silver eagle catching the light as I moved. Medals and ribbons adorned my chest in neat precision, each one earned through grit, sacrifice, and honor. I tied my hair back into a tight, professional bun, slipped on my white gloves, and took a final breath. This was not just a wedding. This was a battlefield of a different kind. And I was marching in with the power of every hardship I had ever overcome. As I walked through the grand entrance of the Grand Oak Ballroom, conversations dimmed, eyes turned, and the atmosphere shifted. I didn't need to announce myself. The uniform spoke louder than any introduction ever could. Men straightened their ties. Women whispered behind champagne glasses. A few young cadets stood and saluted out of instinct. But no one truly recognized me. At least, not yet. I made my way quietly toward the reception area, where a long line of guests were congratulating the newlyweds at the head table. From a distance, I saw Samantha, my younger sister, radiant in her designer white gown, smiling for photographs beside her new husband. Michael looked polished in his own dress uniform, his posture proud but at ease. On either side of them sat our parents, Edward and Carolyn Collins. Even after all these years, they looked almost unchanged, regal, proud, and still clinging to that carefully maintained image of the perfect family. My heart raced, but I kept my step steady. When my turn in the receiving line finally came, Samantha's smile froze. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I saw recognition dawn slowly, like a ghost from the past she thought had long since vanished. "Avery," she whispered, stunned. Her voice barely reached above the string quartet's background melody. Michael, unaware of the storm that had just touched down, looked between us with polite curiosity. "Do you know her?" he asked. I straightened my posture and smiled calmly, feeling the weight of 10 years dissolve in that moment. "More than you think," I replied evenly. "I'm her older sister." Michael's brow furrowed in disbelief. "Sister?" He turned toward Samantha, confusion clear in his expression. "You never mentioned you had a sister." Color drained from Samantha's face. Her fingers twitched slightly on her bouquet. I could see the silent panic in her eyes as she struggled to hold her composure in front of the crowd and military guests. Behind them, I noticed movement. Edward and Carolyn were approaching, their polished smiles beginning to falter as their gaze fell upon my face, and then upon my uniform. Edward reached us first, forcing a chuckle that didn't match his tight jaw. "Well, what an unexpected surprise," he said, his voice calm but calculated. "We weren't sure you would come." "Oh, I couldn't possibly miss my only sister's wedding," I replied with a smile laced in grace and steel. "After all, family is the most important thing. Isn't that what you always said, Dad?" His jaw tensed. Carolyn came next and leaned in for a stiff, mechanical hug. Her voice was light, theatrical. "You look different." "I should hope so," I said as she pulled away. 10 years can change a person. Especially when they have to rebuild their life from nothing. The meaning wasn't lost on anyone at that table. Michael, trying to maintain decorum, extended his hand toward me. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Avery. Samantha she never told me she had a sister." I took his hand firmly. "There are many things about the Collins family you still don't know, Michael," I said with a polite smile that barely veiled the storm beneath. From behind him, I noticed the eyes of General Richard Thompson fall on me. His face, already familiar from countless headlines and ceremonies, tilted slightly in recognition. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. "Colonel Collins?" he asked, his voice steady but stunned. "Avery Collins. You're the same Colonel Collins who received the National Security Medal last year from the Pentagon." The room silenced around us. I held his gaze and nodded once. "Yes, sir. That's correct." His eyes widened with real admiration. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We served with one of your commanding officers overseas. He had nothing but the highest praise for you. It's an honor." Samantha looked like her soul had left her body. Edward and Carolyn froze completely, unable to hide their horror. Their embarrassment had turned into a nationally decorated military officer, and everyone in the room just witnessed it. "I didn't recognize you right away, Colonel." "Forgive me," General Thompson said warmly, extending his hand. "No apologies needed, General," I replied, shaking it with equal firmness. "I'm not the same girl I used to be." And in that moment, I knew I had just taken back everything they tried to erase. Their shame was now their greatest irony. And this was only the beginning. The moment passed, but the silence lingered like smoke after a cannon blast. All around us, guests whispered, speculating, glancing toward me with newfound curiosity and admiration. I had walked in as a stranger. Now I was the sister they never knew existed, the colonel their perfect family had erased. Edward, my father, was clearly struggling to recalibrate. His lips curved into a weak smile, but his eyes betrayed the tension rippling beneath his skin. "Why don't we find you a seat?" he said through clenched teeth, attempting to regain control. "Some of Samantha's cousins are at table 11. You'd be most comfortable there." That was Edward Collins's way. Segregate the inconvenient. Push the problem to the edge and pretend it never belonged in the center. I gave a polite nod. Of course. I wouldn't want to ruin another family gathering. I already did that once, remember, Dad? When you called me the ugly graduate who didn't reflect well on the company's image? His expression cracked. He hadn't expected me to say it. Not there. Not then. Michael turned sharply to look at him. "Wait, what?" My father chuckled nervously, but there was no humor in it. "I don't know what she's talking about," he said quickly. "She's probably misremembering." "I'm not," I interrupted gently, never raising my voice. "I remember it perfectly. You were on the phone in your study. I passed by the door. You said Samantha was the family jewel and I didn't get the good genes." A stunned silence settled again. Michael looked from me to Samantha, and then to Edward, clearly absorbing a version of this family he had never imagined marrying into. Samantha, ever the performer, jumped in to defuse the scene. "Avery decided to follow her own path years ago," she said quickly. "We had differences of opinion." I turned to her, eyebrows raised. "Differences of opinion," I repeated softly. What an elegant way to describe being disowned. Nearby guests were watching now, their curiosity piqued, their expressions subtly shifting. My father, eyes darting toward them, stepped closer and lowered his voice to a hiss. "This is not the time or place, Avery. It's your sister's wedding." "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice calm and clear. "Wouldn't want to ruin another celebration. Like my graduation, when I was told I embarrassed the family brand." He paled further, and for once, had nothing to say. Michael looked deeply unsettled. As I turned to step away, the sound of polished shoes approached behind me. It was Gabriel Dawson, one of Michael's colleagues and apparently a junior officer under General Thompson. "Impressive entrance, Colonel," he said, offering me a glass of champagne. His tone was respectful, but tinged with genuine intrigue. "Thank you," I replied, accepting the drink. "Avery Collins." "I know," he said, smiling. "Gabriel Dawson. I've read your name in a few defense review reports. Your intel strategies during the Blackridge operation were legendary." "Diplomatic of you to say," I answered with a small laugh. He leaned in slightly. "I'm diplomatic by nature, but I sense you value honesty more." "Honesty cost me my place in this family," I said plainly.
"So yes,
"I do." The music swelled in the background. The master of ceremonies stepped up, announcing the newlyweds' first dance. Everyone shifted toward the dance floor, giving Samantha and Michael space to twirl under soft golden lights. The moment was beautiful, curated perfection, but from where I stood, it felt as hollow as a staged photo shoot. Gabriel followed my gaze. "There's an interesting story behind your absence, I imagine," he commented, watching my face carefully. I didn't look at him. "A story of rejection, of impossible expectations, of being too flawed to fit a perfect frame." "I'd like to hear it sometime," he said softly. Something in his voice wasn't idle curiosity. I turned toward him, narrowing my eyes slightly.
why?"
He hesitated for only a moment. "Because I used to work with your father."
Briefly.
"Let's just say we didn't part on the best of terms. And I think you might hold insights I don't."
Ah.
There it was. My eyebrows lifted slightly. "Interesting. The party isn't going the way they expected, is it?" Gabriel said with a smirk, gesturing toward Edward and Carolyn, who were huddled with a few other prominent guests, clearly trying to keep the topic of me far from the central conversations. "They're trying to keep me away from Michael's family," I said, as if proximity might expose their secrets. Gabriel clinked his glass gently to mine. "Then maybe we should stay exactly where we are." The toast was subtle, but powerful. I raised my glass and took a sip, watching as my parents and sister looked over nervously. They knew I was back, but what they didn't know yet was that I wasn't leaving quietly. Dinner was served, but the tension on my parents' faces was more bitter than anything on the menu. They had seated me, deliberately, at a table tucked in the back, far from the main stage. I was placed among distant cousins, old family friends, and peripheral guests who barely knew the Collins name. It was a classic Edward Collins maneuver: control the optics, keep the threat contained. But this wasn't 18-year-old Avery anymore. This was Colonel Avery Collins, and I didn't need a spotlight to be seen. As courses were cleared and wine glasses refilled, the master of ceremonies returned to the stage. With a booming voice, he announced, "Now, a few words from the father of the bride, Mr. Edward Collins." Polite applause echoed as my father took the microphone, beaming the way only he could in public settings. All charm, all mask. He held his champagne flute with practiced grace. "Dear friends, family, and honored guests," he began, voice smooth, deliberate. "Tonight is one of the proudest moments of my life. Watching my daughter, Samantha, my pride and joy, begin a new life with a fine young man like Captain Michael Thompson, it fills my heart with gratitude." I leaned back in my chair, arms folded. His tone was rich with pretense, the kind of speech he'd likely practiced in front of a mirror for days. Each line carefully constructed, every pause strategic. "Samantha has always embodied the values we, the Collins family, hold dear: grace, intelligence, elegance. She is a shining example of everything we stand for." Every word was a dagger in disguise. Not so subtle jabs at the daughter, who wasn't invited into that golden image. The message was clear to anyone who understood the context. Samantha was everything I wasn't. Applause followed. But for me, each clap sounded like a countdown. I didn't plan to say anything. I really didn't. But something shifted inside me. 10 years of silence, of being erased, of being referred to in past tense, if at all, it boiled to the surface. The master of ceremonies returned. "If any family or friends would like to share a few words or blessings with the couple, now is the time." Without thinking, I stood. It wasn't a grand gesture. I didn't slam my chair or clear my throat dramatically. I just walked, calm, precise, toward the microphone. I could feel eyes turning. Whispers beginning. Samantha's face drained of color. Edward blinked slowly, as if his brain had frozen mid-denial. I took the mic, scanning the crowd with a quiet smile. Good evening. For those who don't know me, my name is Colonel Avery Collins, United States Army, and I am Samantha's older sister. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Someone near the front actually dropped their fork. The contrast between my introduction and Edward's perfect family fairy tale couldn't have been more striking. I imagine some of you are surprised, I continued. After all, you've probably never seen me in family photos or heard my name in the charming anecdotes my parents like to share. I let the silence breathe. No rush, just truth. For years, I walked a very different path. I was the daughter who didn't quite fit. Not graceful enough, not elegant enough. Certainly not marketable enough to stand beside the Collins name. So, I was quietly removed. I noticed my father shift uncomfortably, fingers tightening around his glass. But here's the thing about being erased. You get used to building your own legacy from scratch. You learn discipline, integrity, and strength. Not in country clubs or boardrooms, but on the battlefield. I turned to Samantha, who looked like she might faint. Samantha, you've always been the family star. Today, you look beautiful, just as everyone expected. And I genuinely wish you happiness. Then I looked at Michael. And to you, Michael, I offer this wisdom. Get to know the family you've married into. All of it. My voice didn't shake.
I didn't yell.
I didn't curse or accuse. But the silence after my words was heavier than gunfire. I returned to my seat to a polite wave of applause. Most of it confused, some of it impressed. The subtext wasn't lost on those who mattered. Not tonight. Moments later, as the dessert was being served, a hand gently tapped my shoulder. It was Michael. Can we talk for a moment? He asked, face serious, voice low. I nodded, standing with him and stepping aside to a quiet corner near the exit. Your speech, he began, was interesting. I was rather discreet, I replied, sipping my water. All things considered. What exactly were you being discreet about? He asked, clearly unsettled. Samantha barely mentioned you. She told me once that you had distanced yourself due to personal differences. I held his gaze. Families are complicated, Michael. Especially when success and beauty are the only currencies that matter. I didn't meet the criteria. So, I was excluded. You're saying they kicked you out? I'm saying, I replied carefully, that you should know who you've married. Especially if you plan to have children someday.
His face changed.
Thoughtful. Troubled. There's more to this, isn't there? He said quietly. Before I could respond, Samantha approached, panic barely hidden behind a stiff smile. Michael, they're asking for more photos with your parents, she said sweetly, her eyes throwing daggers at me. Michael hesitated, then nodded.
Right.
Coming.
He turned to me.
I'd like to continue this conversation later. Anytime, I replied with a calm smile. As soon as he walked away, Samantha's mask dropped. What do you think you're doing? She hissed. I'm having a civilized conversation with my new brother-in-law, I replied evenly. Unlike you, I don't hide the truth. You always played the victim, she snapped. Always wanted everyone to feel sorry for you. I shook my head slowly. No, Samantha. I never wanted sympathy. I wanted a family who didn't measure love in aesthetics and reputation. You left, she said sharply. No one kicked you out. Really? I raised a brow. Have you told Michael how the will was changed a month after I left? Or how Dad made sure no local company would hire me? She froze. I stepped closer. You were there. You heard those calls. You watched it happen. Her silence was the answer. I hated you for years, I said quietly. I blamed you for staying quiet, for letting them erase me.
But now,
I thank you. Her brows furrowed. If they hadn't cast me out, I never would have found my strength. Her lips parted. You're in the Army? Financial intelligence, I replied. Last year, I helped dismantle a corporate merger that nearly collapsed half the East Coast's defense housing sector. You might know it, Monte Verde? Recognition flashed in her eyes. That was your work, she whispered. Every word of that advisory report. I smiled. The same one that tanked Dad's project. She stepped back, visibly shaken. That was revenge? No, I said. That was business. The revenge? It's only getting started. Before Samantha could fire back, someone interrupted us, a voice smooth yet laced with curiosity. Hope I'm not intruding, Gabriel Dawson said as he approached, holding a glass of champagne. His smile carried just enough charm to feel disarming. Colonel Collins, would you grant me this dance? I glanced at Samantha, whose face twisted with frustration, and then back to Gabriel. Of course, I replied, placing my hand in his and stepping away from my sister's glare. As we moved onto the dance floor, the band transitioned into a slow, elegant piece. Gabriel's steps were confident, practiced. He led with the precision of someone who'd attended more than a few military galas. You're causing quite a stir tonight, he commented with a grin. I've been causing trouble for this family since the day I was born, I said, my voice light but with a sharp undertone. But tonight isn't about trouble, it's about truth. Truth, he repeated, studying my face. I can see it bothers your father. He's been watching you since you walked in, like a general watching an unpredictable adversary. I glanced across the room, spotting Edward Collins standing stiff near General Thompson. His expression was a mix of anger and fear, his jaw tight as he murmured to Carolyn, who avoided looking at me altogether. You're right, I said. But for once, I'm not here to hide or to apologize. I'm here to stand exactly as I am. Gabriel nodded. You've already done that, and trust me, people are noticing. We danced in silence for a few beats before he leaned in slightly. I used to work with your father, you know, back when I was consulting on defense-related real estate acquisitions. He's a complicated man. That's one way to put it, I replied dryly. He made promises, Gabriel continued, and then, well, let's just say he doesn't always honor those who help him climb. I smirked. Sounds familiar. The dance ended, and as Gabriel escorted me off the floor, I noticed Michael watching us. His expression wasn't hostile. It was thoughtful, almost concerned. He excused himself from a conversation with General Thompson and walked toward me. Colonel Collins, Michael said formally, I'd like to introduce you to my parents. Samantha, who had been speaking to a group of guests, spun around at his words, her face pale with panic. This wasn't part of her plan. She hadn't counted on me being pulled into the very spotlight they wanted to deny me. I'd be honored, I replied, deliberately ignoring Samantha's glare. Michael led me across the ballroom to a table where his parents were conversing with other distinguished guests. His father, General Richard Thompson, looked every inch the retired military hero, tall, composed, his medals from past service still gleaming proudly on his lapel. Beside him sat his wife, Margaret Thompson, graceful and dignified. Dad, Mom, Michael began, I'd like you to meet Colonel Avery Collins, Samantha's sister. General Thompson extended his hand immediately, his eyes lighting up with recognition. I've heard of you, Colonel Collins. Your work in the Black Ridge operation was exemplary. It's an honor. The honor is mine, General, I said, shaking his hand firmly. His wife smiled warmly. It's wonderful to finally meet you, Avery. Samantha's never mentioned having such an accomplished sister. I didn't miss the flicker of discomfort on Samantha's face from across the room. She tends to keep that quiet, I replied, my tone polite but pointed. Just then, Edward and Carolyn approached, alarm flashing in their eyes. My father's smile was stretched thin as he tried to insert himself into the conversation. General Thompson, he said, I see you've met our Avery. Yes, the general said with genuine admiration. You must be incredibly proud. A colonel at 42? That's no small feat. My father's throat tightened. He glanced at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw him without his mask, caught between embarrassment and the realization that his discarded daughter now commanded a respect he could never manufacture. We are proud, Carolyn said quickly, her voice overly sweet. Avery's always been determined. I smiled faintly. Determined is one way to put it. Tell me, General Thompson said, what's your current assignment? Strategic intelligence operations, I replied. I work closely with Pentagon analysts on national security threats and counterintelligence. It's demanding, but worth every hour. The general's eyes gleamed with respect. Impressive. You know, the Army needs more leaders like you. Edward tried to steer the topic elsewhere, but it was too late. The admiration in General Thompson's tone had already shifted the energy. The guests nearby were listening, leaning in as though my very presence was rewriting the social hierarchy of the room. Sometimes, I said, my gaze fixed on my father. The people we underestimate end up accomplishing the most. My father stiffened. General Thompson raised his glass. To Colonel Collins, he said suddenly, his voice carrying across the table. An extraordinary officer. And now, part of our extended family. The toast caught my parents off guard. Carolyn's smile faltered for a moment, while Edward's jaw clenched. I lifted my own glass, meeting the general's gaze. Thank you, sir. It was a victory I didn't have to announce. It spoke for itself. As the toast ended and the table settled back into conversation, I noticed Samantha watching from across the ballroom, her smile frozen, eyes locked on me like a hawk losing control of her sky. She had spent her whole life basking in being the favored daughter, the only daughter, once I was erased. Now the spotlight had shifted, and she didn't know how to cope with it. When I stepped away to grab a glass of water, Michael followed. His face showed a mixture of conflict and confusion. I don't understand, he said quietly, once we were alone near a side hallway. If you've accomplished so much, if you're this respected, this successful, why does your family act like you don't exist? I looked at him, the pain from years past tempered now by clarity. Because they were ashamed of how I looked, not who I was. When I was 18, I wasn't elegant or beautiful. I had acne, braces, and a round face. My father once said out loud that I didn't reflect well on the family brand. That Samantha was the jewel. I overheard it the night of my graduation. Michael's jaw tightened. He said that out loud. And when I confronted them, I continued, he told me I didn't fit into their vision. A month later, they removed me from the will and made sure no one in Charlotte's corporate world would hire me. They didn't just abandon me, Michael, they buried me. He looked shaken. Samantha knew? She didn't say a word, I said softly. She stood there as they turned their backs on me. And she never reached out afterward. Not once. Michael ran a hand through his hair. This is a lot. I married into this family without even knowing they had another daughter. That's not just cruel, it's insane. It's carefully curated, I replied. Just like everything else they do. Samantha knew marrying into a military family or family would mean appearances mattered even more. That's why you never heard about me. Michael looked down, his voice low. There's more, isn't there? Before I could answer, Samantha approached, perfectly timed as always. Her posture was graceful, but her eyes carried storm clouds. Michael, she said, her voice artificially sweet, they're waiting for us near the cake. The photographer's calling. In a moment, he replied firmly, not looking at her. She turned to me, her smile strained. Avery, why are you doing this? Coming here after 10 years. What exactly is your goal? I met her gaze calmly. I didn't come to destroy your wedding. I came to show you that you didn't destroy me. Samantha's eyes narrowed. You still love playing the victim, don't you? Always so dramatic. I laughed quietly, not bitter, but resolved. Not a victim. Not anymore. I'm a colonel in the U.S. Army. I've led teams through war zones, negotiated intelligence operations across borders, and stood my ground in places that make this ballroom look like a playpen.
You don't scare me, Samantha.
And you never will again. She flinched just a flicker, but I saw it. Before she could speak again, a voice behind us interrupted. Excuse me, said General Thompson, walking up. Samantha, your ride to the hotel is waiting outside. You and Michael leave for Paris early in the morning. Samantha nodded stiffly, her eyes flicking between the general and me. Michael gave her a nod, then looked at me one last time. Avery, I'd like to keep in touch. There's more I need to understand. I pulled a small, simple card from the inner pocket of my uniform. You know where to find me. He took it, placed it in his jacket, and walked away beside his bride, though the space between them felt far wider than it had earlier in the evening. As they left, General Thompson lingered. Interesting family dynamic, Colonel. You have no idea, I replied with a small smile. Oh, I think I do, he said, his tone dry. Your father's had a reputation in certain circles for, let's say, cutting corners when it suits him. I never liked doing business with men like that. I studied him for a moment. And now you're his daughter's father-in-law. Life has a sense of irony, he replied. But I also know strong leaders when I see them. And you, Colonel Collins, are the kind of ally I trust more than a polished speech or a clean resume. I nodded. I appreciate that. My company's preparing a national expansion. If you're open to discussions next week, I'd like your input. Not just as a courtesy, but because I trust you know how to build things the right way. His words struck me not just as opportunity, but validation. I wasn't being acknowledged because of family ties. I was being recognized because of merit. I'll make time, I replied. Monday work for you? He smiled. Claudia from my office will call to schedule. As he walked away, Gabriel appeared again beside me. Ready to go? He asked, glancing toward the exit. Almost, I said. There's just one thing I need to do. I turned and walked toward the far end of the ballroom where my parents stood alone, watching the room clear out, their shoulders rigid. They didn't see me coming until I was standing right in front of them. I'm leaving now, I said, my voice calm even. Edward turned, clearly grasping for some kind of dignified exit strategy. Avery, he said with forced cordiality. Tonight was something. Let's not pretend, I said. It was exactly what you feared it would be. The night your discarded daughter became the one person everyone wanted to know. Carolyn gave a weak, trembling smile. We always knew you had potential. No, I corrected. You ignored it until someone with real power saw it first. My father inhaled sharply. You've made your point. Have I? I tilted my head. Because this wasn't about revenge. Not really. This was about showing you what you lost. He looked at me for a long moment. Is there any chance we can repair things? Maybe, I said softly. But not with performance. Only with truth. I turned and walked away, past Gabriel, past the empty tables, out into the cool night air of Austin. For the first time in a decade, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter or the rejected girl. I felt exactly who I was. Colonel Avery Collins. And I was finally free. The night air outside the Grand Oak Ballroom felt cool against my skin, but I didn't shiver. I stood beneath the soft golden light at the entrance, breathing slowly, as if exhaling the last decade of bitterness and reclaiming each breath as my own. Gabriel waited beside me in silence, respectful of the moment. Everything okay? He finally asked, his voice quiet. I turned toward him and nodded. Surprisingly, yes. Forgive me for saying this, Colonel, he said, hands in his pockets. But you didn't come here just to show them who you've become. You came to close something, didn't you? I met his eyes. Exactly. That night, I returned to my hotel suite, still in full uniform, and stood by the large window overlooking Austin's skyline.
I didn't remove the medals from my chest.
I didn't untie my hair. I simply stood there, still and steady, like I had on missions where the quiet was louder than chaos. The next morning, sunlight poured into the room. I sat on the terrace with a fresh cup of black coffee, my laptop open beside me as I answered a few emails from my intelligence division. I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had defeated anyone, but because I had finally spoken my truth aloud. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Gabriel. Breakfast? I have information you might want to see about Monteverde. I smiled. Gabriel had proven to be more than a polite dance partner. He had history with my father's operations, and now he was offering something more, something that might affect Edward Collins's empire beyond personal humiliation. We met at a quiet corner cafe outside the city center, a place unlikely to be frequented by any of the wedding guests. He was already seated, a black briefcase beside him and a double espresso in front of him. Morning, I said, sitting across from him. I hope this isn't one of those military-style briefings that come with NDAs. He chuckled. No forms to sign. Just truth. He handed me a folder. Inside, I found documents, emails, internal reports, permit filings, proof of illegal municipal dealings tied to the Monte Verde project.
Bribery.
Contract manipulation. Quiet transfers to dummy corporations under shell names I recognized from a past intelligence scan. How did you get this? I asked, genuinely impressed. I kept contact with some of your father's ex-partners, he replied. Turns out, a few of them were waiting for someone to take Edward down from the inside. I skimmed through the pages. It was airtight and explosive. If General Thompson saw this, he'd walk away from any future association with your father, Gabriel finished. And possibly trigger a federal audit, I added. Gabriel leaned forward. The question is, what do you want to do with it? Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in a decade. My mother. I hesitated, then answered. Hello. Avery. Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. Your father, he's had a heart attack. We're at Brookview Medical Center. The doctors say it's serious. I stiffened. Despite everything, the words hit me hard. Is he stable? They're doing all they can, she replied. But he's been asking for you. I hung up and looked at Gabriel, who had read my expression before I could speak. Go, he said simply. I'll hold on to the documents. We'll talk later. Within an hour, I was walking the sterile, two white halls of the hospital where I was ironically born 42 years ago. In the waiting room, I saw Samantha sitting hunched in a chair, her makeup smudged, her expression hollow. My mother sat in the corner, her hands clasped in her lap, visibly aged since last night. She came, Samantha whispered, addressing my mother as I approached. Carolyn stood, unsure whether to smile or cry. Thank you for coming, she said. It means more than you know. I looked her in the eyes. I'm not here for you. I'm here because he's my father. Just then, a nurse appeared. Miss Collins? He's awake and asking for you. Only you for now. The hospital room was dim, with only the monitor lights glowing faintly. My father lay in the bed, pale and diminished beneath the blankets, wires hooked to his chest, an oxygen tube under his nose. His eyes opened as I stepped inside. Avery, he croaked. I stepped forward slowly. I'm here. He struggled to sit up slightly, but winced. Doctors say, I'll make it. But it was a warning. A big one. I said nothing. I let him speak. What I did to you, he said slowly. What we did, it was unforgivable. I know that now. I watched him, unsure if the man I once feared had finally discovered the vulnerability he always tried to erase from others. Why now? I asked. Because you're in a hospital bed? Or because I now have power that threatens you? He closed his eyes briefly. I deserve that. Your suspicion. Your anger. But no, it's not about that. Last night, when General Thompson toasted to you, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. And then shame, because I hadn't earned the right to feel it. I kept still. My entire life, he continued, was about shaping an image, building an empire based on what looked good. I thought Samantha was the face of that legacy. But last night, I saw I was wrong. His eyes filled with tears. It's not just about image. It's about substance. And you're the strongest legacy I've ever had. I swallowed hard. My armor cracked just a little. I've reinstated you in the will, he added. Not because you need it, but because it's right. I looked at him, searching for the sincerity I never thought I'd see. It was never about money, I said softly. It was about being seen, about being respected. He nodded slowly. I see you now, Avery. And I'm sorry I didn't sooner. I left the room silently, unsure of what I felt. Relief, sadness, clarity. Outside, Samantha stood, her arms folded. Is he okay? She asked. For now. She hesitated, then spoke. I'm sorry. I looked at her, guarded. For what? For everything. For not speaking up. For going along with them. I didn't respond. I always envied you, she said suddenly. Even when you were the ugly one. Because you were free. You didn't live for their approval. I never had that courage. I studied her, for the first time not as my rival, but as someone just as trapped in Edward Collins's perfect world. Maybe now, I said quietly, you can start to live your own story. She nodded, wiping her eyes. And for the first time in 10 years, we stood in silence, not as enemies, but as women learning how to be sisters again. 3 days after the hospital visit, I received a call from General Thompson's assistant, Claudia. She informed me that the general wanted to meet urgently regarding a matter of strategic importance. I wasn't surprised. After what had surfaced at the wedding, and Gabriel's documents, something was clearly shifting in the balance of power. We met at his office, located in a sleek government facility in downtown Austin. His posture was firm as always, but there was gravity in his tone I hadn't heard before. "Thank you for coming, Colonel Collins," he said, gesturing for me to sit. Michael was already present, seated to the side, looking somber but composed. "I've come into information that concerns both of you," the general began. "It appears your father, Edward Collins, has been utilizing privileged information passed from within our circles to manipulate real estate acquisitions. This includes details Michael disclosed to Samantha in confidence." I turned toward Michael, who gave a small nod. "I confronted Samantha after the wedding," he said. "She didn't deny it. She told me she gave the data to your father because she thought it was her duty to protect the Collins legacy." "She made a serious mistake," the general said firmly. "And while I am inclined to view her as misled, the impact of that betrayal cannot be ignored." Michael looked visibly shaken. "I canceled the honeymoon. We've been trying to talk through things, but trust doesn't come back easily." I stayed quiet for a moment, then asked, "What do you want from me?" The general leaned forward. "Your expertise. Your insights into how your father operates. Your integrity, which I now trust more than anyone else's in this equation. We're considering a legal response, but before that, I want to explore an option for a strategic merger. One that eliminates the risk of Edward's empire causing further damage, but also, potentially, salvages what can be saved. A merger. With Altus Intelligence, my own advisory firm, acting as the bridge." "You want my help to take control?" I said, understanding dawning. "You don't just want to expose him. You want to replace him." "Not with vengeance," the general clarified. "With stability. You're the only one with one foot in both worlds." I nodded slowly. "I'll consider it. But if I do this, it won't be for redemption. It'll be for the people he's hurt. And it will be done by my rules." Michael stood. "Avery, for what it's worth,
I'm sorry.
I should have seen things sooner. I married into something I didn't understand. I'm still trying to." "That's all any of us are doing," I replied. That night, I returned to the hospital, where my father was finally being discharged. He looked better, frail, but clearer in the eyes than I remembered. "I heard about the meeting," he said as I entered. "General Thompson wants to erase me." "No," I replied. "He wants to contain you." Edward gave a dry laugh. "That's fair." "I haven't agreed yet," I said. "But I might." He looked at me carefully. "If you do, will you destroy what I built?" I held his gaze. "I'll protect what's worth saving. But I won't protect your lies." He didn't argue. In the days that followed, I worked with Gabriel and a legal team to draw up the terms of a new strategic partnership, one that merged Collins Developments with Altus Intelligence under a new umbrella where I held majority oversight. The general backed the plan. Investors rallied behind it. Even Samantha, slowly and hesitantly, offered support. Weeks later, we hosted the signing ceremony for the merger at the Austin Civic Center. The media dubbed it a reconstruction of legacy, but I saw it as something simpler, a reclamation of truth. My father stood beside me as I signed the documents, his hands trembling, but his voice steady. "You earned this," he whispered. "Not just the title, the right to define the name again." I nodded once. "It's not about the name. It's about what comes after it." At the reception afterward, Samantha approached me. She looked tired, but sincere. "Michael and I are going to counseling," she said. He hasn't made any decisions yet, but he's trying. I studied her face. She wasn't wearing the perfect mask anymore. Just her real one. I hope you're doing it for each other, not just to save face, I replied. I'm doing it because I want to be better, she said. For him, and for me. Maybe one day for us. I let the words hang in the air, then said softly, it's a start. 3 months passed. The merger was stable. My father transitioned into an advisory role. Samantha stepped away from PR and began volunteering at a veteran center, quietly rebuilding her image, not for others, but for herself. One Saturday evening, my phone rang. It was Michael. I just wanted to thank you, he said. The deal was a success. But more than that, you gave me clarity. About Samantha. About everything. I just told the truth, I replied. We're hosting a small family dinner next weekend, he said. Just a few people. Samantha asked me to invite you, personally. The words made me pause. 10 years ago, I was erased from the family circle. Now I was being invited into its most private center. I'll come, I said. The night of the dinner, I wore my dress uniform, not to prove anything but because it was part of me. Samantha greeted me at the door with no makeup, a simple dress, and a hesitant smile. I'm glad you came, she said. I'm glad you asked. At the table sat our mother, quieter than I ever remembered, and our father, watching everything with the careful eyes of a man who had finally seen the cost of his choices. We weren't perfect. We weren't healed. But we were somehow still standing. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest victory of all. On my office wall now hangs 2 framed pieces. One is my National Security Medal, awarded for service in Operation Blackridge. The other is a wedding invitation. Samantha and Michael, the Grand Oak Ballroom, Austin, Texas. Below it, in my own handwriting, I wrote, they tried to forget me, but I became unforgettable. And that, not revenge, not applause, not validation, was my real justice. My story, my victory, my peace.